few years ago, in parts of the American Southwest, where rivers were drying up and entire landscapes were turning to dust, something strange happened. Instead of building another billion-dollar infrastructure project, they released beavers. Not just a few, hundreds. Into some of the driest places in North America, too. And here's the part that sounds insane. The plan was to drop them into places where there was barely any water left and let them fix the problem themselves. No bulldozers, no engineering teams, no concrete dams, just rodents with big teeth. Let's talk about it. I'm your host, Curtis. Now, if you're picturing cute little animals like politely stacking sticks like a Disney movie, you're already misunderstanding the scale of what we're talking about here. Beavers are not like adorable mascots. They are ecosystem engineers. When they move into a landscape, they don't just build dams, they reshape entire watersheds. They flood valleys. They create wetlands. They slow rivers. And sometimes they completely rewrite how water flows through an entire ecosystem. So when scientists started quietly releasing them into dry western landscapes, the question wasn't just whether it would work. The question was whether we had been ignoring one of nature's most powerful tools for the last century. And the results were uncomfortable. Because in some places, the beavers did what billions of dollars in human engineering failed to do. They brought water back to the desert. To understand why this experiment happened at all, you have to understand something about the American West that people barely talk about. The region was never supposed to look the way it does today. Many of the rivers that now run dry in summer once moved slowly through vast networks of wetlands, ponds, and marshy floodplains. The landscape was spongy. Water soaked into the ground and stayed there. And one of the main reasons for that was an animal most people barely think about anymore: the beaver. Besides European colonization, North America had an estimated 60 to 400 million beavers. Their dams covered enormous portions of the continent. Early explorers described landscapes where rivers were so heavily dammed by beavers that traveling upstream sometimes required dragging boats over dozens of small dams. Entire valleys were turned into wetlands. Streams became chains of ponds. The result was a landscape that held water. But then came the fur trade. For nearly 3 centuries, beavers were hunted relentlessly. Their pelts were turned into hats, coats, and luxury goods for European markets. The beaver population collapsed. By the early 1900s, the entire North American population had been reduced to roughly 100,000 animals. Remember I just told you it was 60 to 400 million? Yeah, it was reduced to 100,000, which is insane. That's like what? Like a 99% drop? It's crazy. Anyways, when the beavers disappeared, something else disappeared with them: the wetlands. Without beaver dams slowing water down, rivers began to cut deeper into the land. Water flowed faster, drained quicker, and stopped soaking into the soil. Streams that once spread out into the wetlands became narrow, fast-moving channels. Floods became more extreme. Droughts became more severe. In other words, when humans removed the beavers, they accidentally rewired entire ecosystems. But it took scientists more than a century to fully understand what had happened. Fast forward to today. Large parts of the American West are facing a water crisis. Rivers like the Colorado are shrinking. Snowpacks are declining. Reservoirs are hitting historic lows. Entire regions are fighting over water rights like it's the last bottle in the desert. And here's where things get awkward. Because while governments were spending billions of dollars on dams, canals, pipelines, and water diversion systems, some scientists started asking a dangerous question. What if the cheapest water management system in the world was something humans had already destroyed? The beaver. At first, the idea sounded ridiculous. Beavers need water to survive. They build dams in streams and rivers, so releasing them into dry landscapes seemed pointless. But researchers had a different theory. They believed that even small seasonal streams, Places that only carried water like part of the year could be transformed if beavers moved in. Because when a beaver builds a dam, the goal isn't just to create a pond, it's to slow water down. And when water slows down, it spreads out. It seeps into the ground. It recharges groundwater. It creates wetlands. And wetlands, unlike rivers, hold water for long periods of time. In other words, a beaver dam doesn't just store water on the surface. It stores water underground, which is exactly what drought-stricken landscapes desperately need. So scientists decided to do something bold. They started relocating beavers. The idea was simple: finding beavers living in places where they were causing problems, flooding farmland, clogging drainage systems, or chewing down trees near suburban neighborhoods, and move them to degraded ecosystems that needed help. In states like Utah, Nevada, Oregon, and Idaho, wildlife agencies began capturing beavers and relocating them into dry valleys, small creeks, and seasonal streams. The animals were transported in crates, sometimes by truck, sometimes by helicopter. In one famous program in Idaho in the 1940s, beavers were even parachuted into remote wilderness areas. Yeah, parachuted. And once released, the animals did what beavers had been doing for millions of years. They started building. At first, the changes were subtle. A few sticks across a stream, a small dam, a pond forming behind it. But then something interesting happened. Other animals began showing up. Fish, frogs, birds, wetland plants. Within a few years, places that had been dry or degraded began transforming. And the most dramatic change wasn't always visible from the surface. It was happening underground. When beavers dam a stream, the water behind the dam spreads outward into the surrounding soil. Instead of rushing downstream, it slowly seeps into the ground. The water becomes groundwater. And groundwater does not disappear quickly. It feeds plants, it sustains streams during dry season, it keeps ecosystems alive long after rainfall stops. Some studies have found that landscapes with active beaver populations can store millions of gallons of additional water in underground aquifers. That's the kind of water storage infrastructure cities normally spend enormous amounts of money trying to build. And the beavers were doing it for free. But the benefits didn't stop there, because wetlands created by beavers also act as natural fire breaks. In the American West, where wildfires have become larger and more destructive every single year, this effect is becoming increasingly important. When fires sweep through forests and grasslands, the areas around beaver ponds often remain untouched. The wet soil land vegetation slow the flames or stop them completely. In other words, these rodents weren't just helping drought, they were helping fight wildfire too, which is crazy. Which leads to a question that makes some people uncomfortable. If beavers can restore ecosystems, recharge groundwater, reduce wildfire risk, and increase biodiversity, why aren't we releasing them everywhere? Well, the answer is simple. Because beavers can also be a nightmare. Beavers don't ask for permission. They don't care about property lines. They don't check zoning regulations. If a beaver decides a certain stream would make a good place for a dam, it's just going to build one. And that can cause serious problems. Beaver dams can flood farmland. They can damage roads and culverts. They can kill trees that landowners don't want destroyed. Entire orchards have been wiped out because beavers flooded the land. So while environmentalists often celebrate beaver reintroduction, many ranchers and farmers see them as destructive pets. And this is where the story becomes more complicated, because the same animal that can restore a wetland can also ruin someone's livelihood. This is the uncomfortable reality of ecosystem restoration. Nature doesn't operate according to human convenience. When you bring a powerful ecological engineer like the beaver, you bring back the chaos that comes with it. And yet, despite these conflicts, the result of many relocation programs has been hard to ignore. In Utah's Escalante River watershed, researchers studied areas where beavers had returned. They found that the water table rose significantly, Wetlands expanded, native plants came back, and during drought years, streams in beaver-occupied areas kept flowing longer than streams without them. In Oregon, satellite imagery has shown entire valley floors becoming greener after beavers established new dams. In Nevada, scientists observed increased biodiversity in areas where beaver ponds formed. Fish populations improved, bird populations increased, amphibians returned. It was like watching ecosystems reboot themselves. And the most remarkable part, the beavers weren't following a restoration plan. They were simply just doing what beavers do. Which brings us back to the strange headline that probably brought you here. US released hundreds of giant beavers into the desert. Now, technically speaking, they weren't prehistoric giant beavers. They existed during the Ice Age and were the size of black bears. The animals being relocated today are the modern North America beaver. But in terms of ecological impact, the nickname isn't entirely wrong. Because when enough of them move into a watershed, the transformation can feel enormous. Streams change, vegetation shifts, entire landscapes begin holding water again. It's a reminder of something humans often forget. Nature already solved many of the problems we're trying to fix. We just remove the systems that keep those solutions running. Of course, releasing beavers into the desert isn't just a magical cure, really. I mean, climate change is still altering rainfall patterns. Water demand is still increasing. Cities and agriculture still consume enormous amounts of water. But the beaver experiment reveals something important. Sometimes the most powerful environmental technology isn't technology at all. It's ecology. And that idea challenges the way modern society tends to think about solutions. We're conditioned to believe that every major problem requires massive infrastructure, like gigantic dams or expensive pipelines or complex engineering projects. But sometimes the answer might look more like a large rodent with orange teeth and a bad attitude. And that realization might be the most controversial part of the entire story. Because if beavers can help restore water systems, then maybe the real question isn't whether we should release more of them. The real question is whether humans are willing to tolerate the chaos that comes with letting nature rebuild itself. Today, beaver populations in North America have rebounded to around 10 to 15 million animals. That's a huge recovery compared to the near extinction they faced a century ago. But it's still a fraction of their historical population, which means many ecosystems that once depended on them are still missing a critical piece. Across the American West, scientists and conservation groups are quietly expanding relocation programs. More beavers are being moved into degraded watersheds. More wetlands are appearing in places that used to be dry. And slowly, landscape by landscape, a forgotten engineer is returning to work. Not because humans became instantly smarter, but because after centuries of trying to control nature, we're finally realizing we need to just let some of it back. So the next time you see a beaver chewing on a tree near a stream, it might look like nothing more than a nuisance. A big rodent gnawing on wood. But that animal might also be doing something that billions of dollars in human engineering struggles to accomplish: holding water on the land. And if the American Southwest is going to survive the water crisis ahead, there's a good chance the solution won't come with another dam or pipeline. It might come from an animal humans nearly wiped off the continent. An animal that, inconveniently for us, refuses to follow our plans, but might be exactly what the desert needs. I'm your host, Curtis. Hope you like this video. Click here to see more. See you next time.